Howdy. My name is John, and this video is a discussion of the book The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. This discussion does contain spoilers, so proceed at your own risk. In my review of this book, I called it overhyped. This book has over 7,600 5-star reviews on Goodreads, which is well over half of the total number of reviews. If you're one of the people that gave this book 5 stars, I certainly don't want to belittle you. The criticisms that I have of this book may not be that important to you, and that's okay. In fact, if you gave this book 5 stars, you may just want to turn this video off right now and watch something else. I may wind up spoiling the book for you, and depending on whether or not that's valuable to you, depends on whether or not you want to keep watching this video. Personally, I found this book to be a failure in world building. I just kind of wanted to make this video kind of to explain why I think that it is, and certainly if I say something that you don't agree with and you can kind of point to the book and show me where I'm wrong, feel free to do so in the comments. I think this book primarily suffers from a desire to not be like other fantasy novels. When you do choose to make your novel just like every other fantasy novel, it does come with some benefits, namely in world building. You don't really have to spend a whole lot of time creating the world and populating it. There's a lot of things that just kind of come in as a default. However, when you try to make it differently, I think you really need to kind of think those things through and then understand how that makes your world different. And I don't really think Winter did that in this case. A lot of these decisions are kind of minor, and really this video may be more nitpicky than anything else. The problem is that there's a number of them, and when you add them all up, it makes for an unbelievable world, in my opinion. First, let's start with the fact that the civilization that Tal belongs to has a ruling queen, and always has a ruling queen. Now, for a human civilization to have a ruling queen, it must mean that the females of this civilization have a power that the men do not. In this civilization, the women are the only one who are able to use magic. They're called the gifted. Presumably, this ability to use magic is why the women stay in power. However, toward the end of the novel, we find out that the queen has been hiding her gifted ability. This doesn't really make sense to me, because if the queen doesn't have this magical ability, it makes it much more likely that she would have been overthrown. Also, we find out that it's not true that only women are gifted. Once the Houdini have captured one of the gifted and learned how to use her power, it's one of the males who is able to enrage one of the Houdini warriors. Also, it makes it very unlikely that Zuri would have been so free to share with Tal the secrets of the gift. In a realistic world, Zuri would have been very carefully instructed not to reveal the secrets to those who were not gifted. And quite frankly, even with the instruction not to reveal the gifts, it's very likely that at some point, men would have figured out how to use the gifts and to begin using them themselves. Now let's discuss the fact that Winter makes this a civilization that uses bronze weapons and armor. Bronze is always used in human civilization to denote a less advanced civilization. Bronze is used in less advanced civilizations because you need a lower temperature in order to make bronze weapons and armor. However, it was supplanted by iron and then later steel weapons because bronze is not as durable as either iron or steel, especially not steel. Steel weapons are, of course, the kind of standard in your standard fantasy setting. Given the limitations of bronze, it's unlikely that a lot of the things that kind of are described in this novel would have happened. They probably wouldn't have trained with bronze weapons very often. It's unlikely that Tal would have had his grandfather's sword. In fact, I think it's unlikely that the Lessers would have even had bronze swords. It would have been much more likely that they would have either had bronze daggers, or if the quality of wood had been better in this land, they probably would have had bronze spears. Here again, bronze depends on the availability of tin, which is typically rather rare. I don't remember a passage where Winter describes tin as being widely available in this land. Next, let's talk about Winter's decision to use a rigid caste system. While I do kind of think he captured the contempt that the nobles would have for the lessers, one thing I did find interesting about this is that the nobles are always described as being bigger and stronger than the lessers. While I was reading this novel, I kind of stopped at the passage where it described Tal as being average. With this way that the caste system works, with everyone higher than Tal's level being taller, bigger, and stronger, would Tal really have been average? At the time, I thought he should have been below average, and really it depends on how the distribution of this is. Obviously, you're going to have fewer nobles than you do of the common people. And so it depends on the distribution whether or not Tal would have been average. I think this would have been a little bit more realistic if Tal had been actually described as being less than average. This brings me to my next point, which is how martial this culture is. We see the contempt that is given to those who are not able to enter the military. We see this in the novel's treatment of Lekan, who was Jabari's older brother, and Jabari, of course, was Tal's close friend. Lekan is really looked down upon because he did not pass the test in order to get into the military training school. Most fantasy novels at least pay some service to the tradespeople and the kind of knowledge workers of their civilization. They don't really focus on them a whole lot, but you can definitely tell that they're there. So here again, people like merchants and engineers and swordsmiths. The novel does describe this civilization as having kind of advanced building. When the focus is on Lekan, I really think Winter could have spent a little bit of time kind of showing how these other professions work in this society, and doing so kind of filled this world out a little bit better. Also, I wondered why the school for the kind of the lessers, why it was so selective and why the training was so brutal. If this is truly a culture on the brink of extinction, I would think that you would train just as many of the lessers as you could in military techniques. I mean, really, you would only want to exclude those who had zero ability to defend themselves. On the same note, I don't understand why the training was so brutal. Again, you've got a culture that's being in danger of being overrun, and yet accidents and deaths are actually rather common during the training. Do understand why you want to train vigorously, because again, you do have a dangerous enemy. At the same time, you want to lose your troops to the enemy, not to one another. Now, everything I've described thus far has been rather minor. However, taken together, I find it hard to believe that this civilization would have been able to show up in a new land, expand as far as they did in an under 200-year period, and then be on the brink of extinction. This brings me to my next point, which is the debate versus talent versus training. Winter argues in this novel that talent doesn't matter nearly as much as training does. Tal is able to enter basically the spirit world, and because time moves differently there than it does in the real world, he is able to get an excessive amount of training, and then that training is what enables him to do the feats that he is able to do. Now, here again, I do know that training does matter. However, training will only take you so far. At some point, the ability of training to increase your skills plateaus, and you only make small incremental changes. In this world, the lessers are only given 1 year of training, and the nobles are given 3 years of training, plus the nobles are bigger and stronger. That makes it unlikely, even with the insane amount of extra training that Tal does, that he would have ever been able to beat a noble in one-on-one combat. The next thing I do want to touch on is that I find Tal to be an idiot. He makes a lot of really bad decisions. Now, these decisions don't bother me quite as much as the stuff that I've discussed before, because first of all, Tal is a teenage boy. I expect teenage boys to make bad decisions, especially given what Tal has been through. I did find it unrealistic that Tal so easily forgave Kellan for his role in killing his father. I mean, Tal goes from hating Kellan to fighting beside him even when the queen is in danger. I do want to credit Winter with the fact that Hadeth is made the Scales leader and not Tal. Tal may be the better fighter, but Hadeth is the one who has the leadership ability. The last thing I want to talk about is comparing this novel to other novels that I've read. The most obvious comparison is with The Princess Bride. Obviously, Tal loses his father and declares revenge, which is the same thing that happens to Inigo Montoya. The novel that I found the most similarities to is Homeland by R.A. Salvatore. In that novel, we have Drizzt, who in that novel is a noble. He's not a common, as is Tal. Drizzt has a very strong father figure who is also a fighter. Drizzt goes to a martial academy and develops a two-weapon fighting style. In fact, when Tal picked up two weapons, I was actually expecting Guinevere to show up. To be fair, the world that Drizzt grows up is much more of a comic book evil than the civilization that Tal grows up in. These characters are so similar that if you've read both novels, it's impossible not to compare the two. Feel free to tell me what you thought of this novel in the comments below, where you think I'm wrong, or if you agree with me. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.